Hi everyone, it's Nina Marie with Nina Marie Design, and today I have a great tutorial for you on how to create partial die cutting for your cards using the Silhouette Cameo. Starting off with a 4.25 by 5.5 inch rectangle, this is going to be a guide for our card base. We're not going to actually cut this out, we're just going to use this as a guide in creating our panel for our card. I opened up the Snowflakes cut file by Sophie Gallo, which I will have a link to on my blog and on my YouTube page, where you can get this on the Silhouette online store. What I did was I ungrouped these snowflakes and resized them to the dimensions that I wanted them to be, because of course they were larger than the card that I was going to be creating. So to do this, what I did was I ended up clicking on one of the snowflakes and navigating over to the scale window of my designer screen. So what I did was I made sure that the lock aspect ratio was on, and I resized the width only to 2.1 inches. This will allow this height to be scaled to the right dimensions. Once I've done that, I moved on to the next snowflake, which will be going in the middle, which is the smaller one. And what I did was I resized that one to 1.4 inches, and of course making sure that the lock aspect ratio was on. The larger snowflake is resized to 2.4 inches, and of course the lock aspect ratio is on. And now that we've resized all of our snowflakes to the dimensions that we want, we're going to start by creating the triangle that they sit on. So opening up your polygon tool, you're going to want to click onto your screen anywhere you want, drag down. Now we're not going to worry about the size of this triangle at the moment. We're just making the shape. What we're going to do is we're going to end up resizing this this triangle to fit into our card base exactly. So pulling up the line to the horizontal axis as the top line, we're going to click there, and then we're going to drag over and connect these lines. Now as you can see, I have it a little off, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click it and just pull that line up a little bit, so that way it creates a nice flat edge. Now that I've done that, I am going to start dragging in my card base again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to resize this triangle so that it fits inside. So I'm going to pull the height up a little bit, and I'm going to now make sure that that fits in there perfectly, and it does. So next I'm going to bring the width out a little bit. We want it a little bit wider than what I've drawn. So we're going to bring the card base in, and I really like how that works because we don't want it too far, because we want to be able to have the snowflakes hanging over, but yet not all the way to the edge of the card. So I'm going to move my card base out of the way, and I'm going to start dragging in the snowflakes. So starting with the one that goes on the bottom, I'm going to put that one and line it up there, and you can line these up however you want. You can rotate them, put them in different positions, you can make them go smaller to larger, larger to smaller, any way you want. It's all kind of your preference. But for this sake, I decided I wanted the larger ones on the ends and the smaller one in the middle. So play with the placement a little bit. Don't worry about the overhanging on the top and left edges. Those we are going to be cutting off shortly. So I rotated the top one just to kind of play with the angles of the snowflake, just so they're not all going in the same direction. So I brought in the card base again to make sure everything's fitting right. And of course, as you can see, that bottom snowflake I have a little too far down towards the bottom. So what I ended up doing is I ended up pulling it up a little bit and making sure that it's inside the card, because I don't want it hanging over the card when it sits on someone's desk or table or anything like that. So now that I have that all set, I'm going to move my base out of the way again. I'm going to drag in the area that I want to get closer to. And this button's really great because you can really get close up to something and go to the exact place that you want to be. So I'm going to bring in my knife tool, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I have the straight edge and the solid shape. So I want to create a line to cut off those top overhanging snowflake pieces. So holding this down the shift key, I'm going to click and drag a line across my snowflake. So that way it creates a nice straight edge. So we're going to go to the select tool, delete those two little pieces that have now been cut off. And what I did was I actually ended up dragging the snowflake down just a smidgen, so that way it fits inside perfectly. Moving on to the medium snowflake, I'm now going to cut the edges off of those pieces. So I took my knife tool, selected held the shift key down and dragged all the way down, took the selector tool and deleted that piece. And as you can see, it's created a nice perfect edge again. Dragging in my card base, I've now put this together so that way I can make sure everything is looking great, and it does. So now we're ready to weld these pieces together. Selecting everything, you can either drag and click and drag and to select out all of the pieces, or you can hold the shift key down and press on each piece. So we're going to move over to the modify window. For this particular case, we're going to hit the weld, and the weld is going to make everything into one line. And as you can see now, the snowflakes are not going to be cut out individually. They're going to be cut out with the triangle. So the triangle is going to be cut out on the two corners, and then it's going to go around the snowflakes. And that's going to create a really neat partial cut for your card. So now we're ready to create the sentiment for our card. And for this card, I used two fonts. For the top and bottom portion of the sentiment, I used Zinc Coleman at 10 points. And I basically duplicated the font so that way it created the same properties as the top portion. And I just wrote out the sentiment that I was creating for this card. And once I've done that, I've now moved on to the other part of the sentiment, and that one was done in Savoy LET, and I resized that font to 51 points, and this created a nice variance in between the two. So spelling out Christmas, I've now pulled that in and lined this up with the rest of my fonts, and I'm going to end up grouping these together because I want the placement to stay the same and not change. So I grouped those together, and I'm going to pull these in, and now as you can see, this is going to create a really great card. What we're going to do is we're going to assign different types of lines to these things because the font, the sentiment is going to actually get sketched out. So what I ended up doing was I assigned a cut line to the snowflakes, pulling the card base out of the way. A cut line at cardstock, which was set at a speed of 2 points, using the ratchet blade, of course. Speed set to 2 points, and the thickness was set to 26. The blade size was set down to 4. And what that does is because I was using a thicker paper, it cut out beautifully. For the font, I'm using a sketch pen, and I brought the thickness down to 3 and, of course, the speed at 2. And that's basically it. And the card ends up turning out great. I put different pieces of pattern paper. I cut these snowflakes out of beautiful snowflake pattern paper. And the font was sketched out with a brown sketch pen. So I hope you enjoyed today's card. Feel free to stop over at my blog, ninamareedesign.com, where I have all sorts of other neat holiday and Christmas tutorials for creating all your cards for this year. Thanks for watching.